At sunrise, in the quiet outskirts of Ouagadougou, long before the city awakens, an old woman named Mariam walks past a dusty road she has crossed all her life. But this morning something feels different. The rumble of new construction machines echoes in the distance. Freshly laid pipes line the roadside. Young workers, some barely in their 20s, move with purpose, carrying tools, blueprints, and hopes far bigger than themselves. For people like Mariam, who witnessed decades of struggle, instability, and broken promises, these small signs of change speak louder than any political speech ever could. Because in Burkina Faso today, transformation is not announced through grand ceremonies. It is felt in the water that finally reaches a village that waited 10 years. It is seen in a young engineer inspecting a power line that never used to exist. It is heard in the laughter of farmers who for the first time no longer fear losing entire harvests to poor storage, bad roads, or middlemen from faraway countries. And at the center of this quiet revolution stands a young military captain, President Ibrahim Traoré, whose leadership has sparked one of the most ambitious national rebuilding efforts Africa has seen in decades. This is not just another government development plan. What is unfolding in Burkina Faso is a full-scale reimagining of sovereignty, economic, technological, and social. 20 mega-projects are now reshaping the nation from energy to agriculture, from transportation to finance. And for those following Africa news closely, the question is becoming impossible to ignore. Is this the moment Burkina Faso finally breaks the cycle of dependence and charts its own future? And if so, what does that mean for the rest of Africa and even for the United States watching from afar? If you care about truth, leadership, and the rise of nations long overlooked, stay with us. What you are about to discover may reshape how you see Burkina Faso and the man leading it. Please share this video if you want more people to witness this turning point, and subscribe if you believe understanding matters more than headlines. When the government of Burkina Faso announced the inauguration of 2 tomato processing plants, one in Bobo Dioulasso and another in Yako, most people outside the country barely noticed. But inside Burkina Faso, the reaction was deeply emotional. For decades, farmers watched their fresh tomatoes rot under the sun, losing both income and dignity because there was nowhere to process them. Now, with facilities capable of handling up to 100 tons a day, thousands of families finally see their hard work transformed into something valuable. Mothers who once worried whether farming could feed their children now speak with quiet pride about contributing to national self-sufficiency. The second project, Burkina Faso's first 100% indigenous electric vehicle, introduced not just a new machine, but a new belief in local talent. Built by the Itowa company, the EV travels 330 kilometers on a 30-minute charge. More important than its specifications is the atmosphere inside the workshop. Young engineers wiping sweat from their brows, students taking notes, fathers bringing their sons to witness a future they never imagined. For many older citizens, this project feels like a symbolic departure from dependence on foreign technology. Then came the revival of Air Burkina. After years of decline, many Burkinabe assumed their national airline would quietly disappear. But the purchase of 2 E-170 aircraft marked a turning point. When the first plane arrived, airport workers stood silently before applauding, not because of the aircraft itself, but because it represented dignity. With new regional routes planned, the country could once again connect to the continent on its own terms. In Bobo Dioulasso, construction began on a modern university hospital. For a country where many families traveled days to access advanced treatment, this project touched the heart of nearly every citizen. Parents imagined their children becoming doctors without leaving the country. Nurses visiting the construction site spoke of hope that medical training would finally match the courage required to serve communities affected by conflict and poverty. On October 7, 2024, Burkina Faso inaugurated its postal bank with 15 billion CFA in starting capital. The event carried particular meaning for rural families who had lived their entire lives without access to banking. For the elderly, opening a bank account felt almost ceremonial, an affirmation that they too belonged to a nation determined to lift everyone, not just the elite. Security has been one of the nation's deepest wounds, and the deployment of Turkish-made drones under Captain Ibrahim Traoré marked a shift in the country's fight against insurgency. Families in remote villages describe a new kind of silence at night, less fear, fewer gunshots in the distance. It is not peace yet, but it is something closer to breathing room. Water projects followed. The $145 million National Water Security Program and dozens of new boreholes changed daily life in ways outsiders rarely understand. For communities long forced to walk miles for water, turning on a tap for the first time created scenes of tears, dancing, and prayer. These moments, simple yet profound, are the foundation of national rebuilding. The completion of the northern interchange in Ouagadougou, though, started before Traoré accelerated under his leadership. For commuters, the project symbolized the difference between governments that promise change and governments that deliver it. Taxi drivers, often the first to judge the state of a city, say traffic no longer feels like punishment. Agricultural modernization came next. With more than 400 tractors, 239 tillers, thousands of motor pumps, and tens of thousands of tons of fertilizer and improved seeds distributed to over 500,000 farmers, rural communities felt seen. Youth and women, often sidelined, became central to a national push toward food independence. Finally, the construction of the Thomas Sankara Museum reminded citizens of the moral foundations of their struggle, courage, integrity, and collective dignity. Visitors describe standing before the future museum as standing before a promise that the sacrifices of Sankara and his 12 companions will not be forgotten as Burkina Faso charts its new course. As Burkina Faso moved deeper into its transformation, the tone of the national conversation began to shift. What had started as scattered development projects now felt like a wave-steady gathering force and impossible to ignore. And the momentum intensified with Project Number 10, the National Solar Power Expansion. For decades, many Burkinabés lived by candlelight, their evenings cut short by darkness. Now, with large-scale solar installations across the country, entire communities stay illuminated long after sunset. Teachers speak emotionally about the first night students were able to study under stable lights. For families that once rationed electricity like medicine, this felt nothing short of revolutionary. Then came one of the most symbolic projects, the establishment of Burkina Faso's first national gold refinery. For years, citizens watched foreign companies extract their gold, tons of it, while the country remained among the poorest in the world. When Captain Ibrahim Traoré inaugurated a refinery capable of processing 400 kilograms daily, people celebrated not the machinery, but the meaning. "It feels like we are finally keeping our own blessings," one elderly miner said. Local newspapers called it a reclaiming of dignity. International observers, however, saw something more: a nation asserting control over a resource long mediated by global markets. Project Number 8, the creation of the new textile industrial zones in Solo and Boro, added emotional depth to the country's industrial revival. Cotton farmers, who had spent generations selling raw cotton at low prices, now envisioned their children working in value-added industries within their own borders. The promise of 4,000 direct jobs and 15,000 indirect ones stirred pride across rural communities. Tailors, designers, machine operators, and fabric dyers all saw a future that once felt reserved for wealthier nations. But the emotional high point for many citizens arrived with Project Number 7, the revitalization of the Donson International Airport. For older Burkinabés who remembered Ouagadougou's aging and overwhelmed airport, the new one, designed to handle 1 million passengers annually, felt like stepping into a new era. Workers involved in the project described a sense of belonging to a national mission. "When this airport opens," one engineer said, "Burkina Faso will no longer be a country people overlook." Even fuel security, long a weakness for the nation, experienced a turning point with Project Number 6, the Penny Hydrocarbon Depot. Designed to store and distribute petroleum products across the country, it addressed a critical vulnerability. Transport workers told journalists that the depot would finally end the cycles of scarcity that left markets empty and villages stranded. For families who relied on fuel for business travel and basic survival, this project felt like a stabilizing anchor. Then came the roads, Project Number 5. An ambitious plan to pave 5,000 kilometers of new roads, more than the country had completed in 6 decades. Truck drivers, farmers, shopkeepers, and teachers all felt the impact. Better roads meant safer journeys, cheaper food, and faster response to emergencies. Parents who had spent years worrying about their children traveling dangerous rural routes expressed relief. The project became a symbol of national cohesion, connecting people not only physically but emotionally. Project Number 4, the Alliance of Sahel States (AES), marked a geopolitical turning point. Burkina Faso, alongside Mali and Niger, forged a new regional bloc focused on security and sovereignty. For villagers living under the threat of terrorism, joint military operations brought a sense of protection. But internationally, reactions were sharp. Western analysts questioned the bloc's alignment. African commentators saw it as a bold rejection of old power structures. The momentum culminated in Project Number 3, the establishment of the Africa Corps military base with Russia. When the facility opened in Lumbila, the world took notice. To supporters, it represented a long-awaited diversification of security partners. To critics, it signaled a deepening shift away from Western influence. Inside Burkina Faso, reactions were mixed, but powerful. Some felt reassured, others wary, but everyone understood that the country had entered a new geopolitical chapter. The emotional and political peak came with projects number 2 and 1, the giant Sinab SS cement factory, producing thousands of tons daily, and finally the nuclear power program with Russia's Rosatom. For a nation where electricity once flickered like a candle in the wind, the dream of energy independence struck the deepest chord. Citizens described it as a doorway to the future, while international observers called it a moment that could redefine the Sahel. By the time the final project was unveiled, it was clear Burkina Faso was no longer merely hoping for transformation, it was living it. As the 20 projects unfolded across Burkina Faso, the most profound impact was not seen in government reports or international headlines, but in the quiet rhythms of ordinary civilian life. In rural towns, farmers who once survived season to season now found stability through tractors, improved seeds, fertilizers, and irrigation tools distributed at a scale the country had never experienced. Women, long the backbone of agricultural labor, felt their burden lighten. Young men who once considered leaving for Europe now stayed home convinced they finally had a future worth building. The emotional tone in farming communities shifted from resignation to determination. The resurgence of local industries, from textiles to cement to gold refining, reshaped not just the economy, but the way citizens perceived themselves. For decades, Burkinabe workers labored under a global system where their raw materials enriched other nations while their own families remained poor. With factories rising and new production lines humming, thousands of citizens felt a renewed sense of dignity. The creation of jobs, thousands, direct, tens of thousands, indirect, meant parents could send children to school, pay medical bills, and participate in the national economy instead of watching it pass them by. Civil pride became a political force in itself. Infrastructure improvements brought another layer of transformation. New roads that stretched across the country did more than facilitate commerce. They opened isolated communities to healthcare access, educational services, and safer travel. A school teacher in a remote village summarized the sentiment simply: "For the first time, it feels like the government knows we exist." Every paved mile strengthened the relationship between the state and the people, replacing decades of distrust with cautious hope. The expansion of water and sanitation facilities delivered one of the most personal and immediate benefits. In households that had endured years of water scarcity, the arrival of boreholes and water security projects was life-changing. Women and children no longer walked miles under the punishing sun to fetch water. This freed children to attend school and allowed women to participate in small businesses or community leadership. For many, improved access to clean water felt like reclaiming time that had been stolen by hardship for generations. But these civil improvements carried political implications as well. The more citizens saw tangible development, the more they compared it to previous governments that spoke of progress yet delivered little. Ibrahim Traoré's leadership began to redefine political legitimacy not through elections or slogans, but through measurable outcomes: roads, hospitals, energy, food production, and security. This shift sparked discussion across the country about what governance should truly mean. Older citizens who had lived through multiple administrations openly questioned whether traditional democratic cycles had served them, as well as this era of rapid implementation. Security reforms, particularly the introduction of drones and the establishment of the Africa Corps military base, brought mixed but powerful reactions. Civilians living near conflict zones felt an immediate difference: fewer ambushes, faster military responses, and a decrease in fear during nighttime hours. Families who had once fled their villages started returning, slowly testing whether stability had truly taken hold. Yet the involvement of Russia and the distancing from Western partners raised concerns among politically aware citizens. They wondered what long-term alliances might look like and whether Burkina Faso could maintain sovereignty while accepting foreign assistance. The broader political identity of the nation also began to shift. The formation of the Alliance of Sahel States (AS) created a sense of regional solidarity that resonated deeply among civilians. Many saw it as a reclamation of power by nations historically overshadowed in global politics, but some worried about the risks of antagonizing Western countries whose aid had supported Burkina Faso for years. Ultimately, the civil and political consequences of these projects formed a single intertwined narrative, a rising belief that Burkina Faso could stand on its own feet, chart its own course, and redefine what leadership looks like in the modern African landscape. From Washington's perspective, the series of projects unfolding in Burkina Faso has not gone unnoticed. Though the United States has not issued direct statements about each development, analysts within American policy circles view the nation's rapid shift as part of a broader realignment occurring across the Sahel. What once appeared to be a peripheral region is now becoming strategically significant, not because of military bases or foreign aid programs, but because countries like Burkina Faso are choosing new partners and asserting new forms of sovereignty. The nuclear power agreement with Russia's Rosatom, the creation of the Africa Corps base, and the strengthening of the alliance of Sahel states are signals that Washington cannot easily ignore. For many Americans, particularly those familiar with the Cold War, this pattern feels familiar. A country turning to Russia for military and energy cooperation triggers instinctive concern. Think tank scholars warn that the Sahel could become a testing ground for great power competition, especially as Western influence declines. Yet some U.S. observers express admiration for Burkina Faso's determination to build infrastructure, expand electricity access, and strengthen local industries. In interviews, retired diplomats note that people-centered development often stabilizes regions more effectively than foreign peacekeeping missions. Still, Washington remains cautious, knowing that every road, refinery, and industrial plant can reshape alliances for decades to come. Europe's reaction has been more openly uneasy. France, once the dominant power in the region, has watched Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger pivot sharply away from Paris. The establishment of the gold refinery, the textile complex, and especially the 5,000-kilometer road project symbolize economic independence that no longer relies on European financing or oversight. French commentators frame these developments as part of a strategic loss, while African analysts argue it is merely the natural end of an unequal era. In Brussels, policymakers are more focused on energy and migration concerns, questioning what a strengthened Sahel alliance means for long-term European security. Russia, by contrast, has responded with strategic enthusiasm. Through the nuclear partnership and military cooperation, Moscow positions itself as a dependable ally, willing to support countries that reject Western pressure. For Russia, Burkina Faso's projects are more than economic opportunities, they are geopolitical statements. Russian media often highlight Traoré's policies as examples of sovereign development, a term that resonates strongly in the global south. Many African viewers interpret this as validation that smaller nations can choose their own path without external approval. China's perspective is more pragmatic. With its involvement in the cement factory and other industrial initiatives, Beijing sees Burkina Faso as part of its long-term economic engagement with Africa. Chinese analysts tend to emphasize infrastructure growth, job creation, and manufacturing, not political realignment. To China, the emergence of local industries aligns with its strategy of supporting production capacity in partner nations. Although Beijing avoids public political commentary, its role in Burkina Faso's economic expansion speaks volumes. Across Africa, reactions are divided but deeply engaged. Younger Africans celebrate the idea of a nation breaking historical patterns of dependence. Older Africans who lived through past upheavals express cautious optimism. Many view Burkina Faso as a test case for whether rapid development can truly coexist with political stability. Even in countries far from the Sahel, discussions about Traore industry revival and regional alliances appear frequently in Africa, news forums, and community gatherings. For the global community, one question rises above all others. Is Burkina Faso's transformation a momentary surge or the beginning of a new model of national renewal that could ripple across the entire African continent? As we step back from the 20 projects reshaping Burkina Faso, one truth becomes impossible to ignore. A nation that once struggled simply to survive is now daring to redesign its future. New roads, new industries, new power sources, new security alliances. Each project stands like a brick laid carefully in the foundation of a country refusing to remain defined by its past. For the Burkinabe people, especially the older generation who endured decades of instability, this transformation feels both exhilarating and fragile. They have seen hope rise before and watched it fall just as quickly. That memory creates a quiet caution beneath the current wave of national pride. And that caution is justified. Ambitious development always brings risk. Burkina Faso's pivot toward new geopolitical partners may strengthen sovereignty, but it also places the country at the center of global rivalries. The nuclear power project demands flawless oversight. The rise of regional alliances demands diplomatic balance. Rapid industrialization demands institutions strong enough to prevent corruption and mismanagement. The question is not whether these challenges exist, they do. The question is whether the leadership and the people can navigate them without losing the momentum they've worked so hard to build. For Americans watching from a distance, especially those who lived through eras of global realignment, the story unfolding in Burkina Faso carries an echo of familiar patterns: nations seeking independence, reshaping identity, choosing partners based on interest rather than pressure. Yet it also carries something uniquely African: an insistence that development must be rooted in dignity, community, and self-reliance. Many who follow Africa news can sense that what Ibrahim Traoré is doing is bigger than politics. It is a symbolic challenge to long-standing power structures. But symbols can cut both ways. They inspire hope, but they can also trigger resistance from forces uncomfortable with change. And this is where the real warning lies. If Burkina Faso succeeds, its success will raise questions across the entire continent. Questions about sovereignty, about foreign influence, about who should control natural resources, about how nations rise after generations of extraction and instability. The ripple effect could be as transformative as the projects themselves. So now the world watches, some with encouragement, some with skepticism, some with quiet fear of what a strong, self-directed African nation might inspire others to attempt. And you, after hearing all this, must answer a question for yourself. Do you believe President Ibrahim Traoré's vision is truly the beginning of a new era for Burkina Faso? Or do you think these ambitions face challenges too great to overcome without external support? Your perspective matters because the future of this nation touches conversations far beyond its borders. Conversations about justice, sovereignty, and what development should look like in the 21st century. If this video helped you understand that story a little more clearly, please share it with someone who still believes Africa's future has already been written. And subscribe if you believe the truth is always more important than the headlines.